This is the Anthrobiology Podcast, hosted by me, Gabby LaPera. Every 2 weeks, I interview a biological anthropologist about what makes us, us. Hey there, everyone. So glad you could join us again. This week, I interview Dr. Tara Cepon-Robins. She is fantastic. You will learn so much about worms and why they're good and bad for us, and also why you should never walk barefoot in the South. I hope you enjoy the episode. One note, I have hired an editor to edit the show, so the sound quality is probably better than you've ever heard it before. But if you have any questions, comments, or concerns, as usual, you can always reach me at gabby.lapera@anthrobiology.com. Hope you enjoy the show. Hello, everyone. Welcome to another episode of the Anthrobiology Podcast. Joining me here today, I have Dr. Tara Cepon-Robins from the University of Colorado, Colorado Springs. How are you?
Good. How are you?
I am very good, and I'm super excited to have you on because I think you're very different than anyone else I've had on, and because your area of research is very, very interesting. And I'm talking a lot about it and not revealing anything, which I think is a sin in podcasting. So here we go. Actually, why don't you give a quick summary of what you study? I think that's a better idea.
Yes. So I am interested in coevolutionary relationships between humans and pathogens. Because pathogens have been a major selective pressure that acted on life in general, that they've played and shaped many parts of us. They played a huge role in human evolution. So, for instance, things like sexual selection, body hair patterning, our immune systems, even emotional and behavioral responses that we have to things around us have been shaped by pathogens. So I would say that my main focus is on these coevolutionary relationships. I mean, this has been called an evolutionary arms race. They infect us, we evolve to resist them, they evolve to infect us better. We evolve to resist them better, and it's this whole on and on. And you can imagine then how that has shaped us in so many ways. So that is the general kind of theoretical background on it. A lot of what I focus on is called the hygiene hypothesis or the old friends hypothesis. And it looks at how reduced exposure to worms and other pathogens that are these old friends that have shaped us, how this reduced exposure may lead to immune system dysregulation. And then because of that, inflammatory disorders like allergy, asthma, autoimmunity, even heart disease has been linked in as one of these diseases. And looking at this relationship in people who have never been infected with helminths is important. But then on the other end of the spectrum, I'm going
to stop you real quick. A helminth is a worm, just in case you didn't know that.
Oh, sorry.
No, you're totally
yes,
fine.
I will define that in a minute. Yes, parasitic worms are soil transmitted helminths, and we get them through contamination with fecally contaminated soil, and then they infect us in that way. But there are other pathogens that are interesting as well. So looking at how people are affected who have never been infected with these things. And then also they have negative implications for health in people who are. So I'm also interested in those kind of trade-offs as well.
Yeah, it's a really interesting interplay, I think, right? Because as you mentioned, people who have never been infected by any kind of like parasitic anything, like a lot of people in the United States, realistically, that actually does potentially have some negative health consequences for us, which is crazy to think because you're like, yeah, parasites are bad. It's good that none of us ever get infected anymore. And probably on the whole, that's true, but it could have some implications for us in terms of our immune mediated responses, like you mentioned, like with allergies and stuff like that. That's why they're telling like really rich ladies on the Upper West Side to feed their kid dirt pills, right?
Yeah, basically let them eat dirt.
Yeah.
I mean, it's probably to some degree why babies want to put everything in their mouths. It's both a way of getting to know their environment, but it's a way of getting exposed to not parasites usually, but to microbes that are good to colonize us and help with immune system and digestion.
I read the other day that about on average, we have 4 pounds of microbes, bacteria just like hanging out inside of us, especially like in our guts. Like they actually help us quite a bit with digestion and whatnot, but that's a lot.
Yeah. Yeah, there's a lot.
It's a lot. I also read that we have 11 pounds of skin, which really freaked me out. I don't know why. I didn't like that.
Skin is oddly gross, isn't it?
It's
I
so
can talk
gross.
about parasitic worms, but 11 pounds of skin is a little too much.
Yeah. Okay, so but then on the other side, you also study people who do potentially have more regular parasitic infections, which also has negative health consequences. It kind of feels like we can't win, but that's okay.
That's nature.
That's nature.
There's no winning in nature.
So
There's
actually,
only
yeah.
only getting by.
That's the most 2021 thing I've ever heard. So actually, I want to talk to you a little bit about your research in Ecuador. You study a particular population called the Shuar.
Mhm.
Who are they? What is it like to be there?
So the Shuar are an indigenous population that live in the Amazon region of Ecuador, and they're spread out in a way that is really interesting to study the effect of health change, of kind of economic change on health. So you have many. So we work across the board. I work with the Shore Health and Life History Project. I should say that first because it's a big project that works in the Amazon. I have a ton of collaborators, various schools. And so this project, we go down and we sort of study the gamut of lifestyle variation among this population. And so we have some that live in sort of more remote regions where they're farther away from a market center. And I use the term remote relatively because it's all a very rural environment, whether you're looking at the more, I guess, town dwelling versus the less town dwelling individuals. They're all very rural populations. So they tend to be forager horticulturalists where they practice foraging, hunting, fishing, and horticulture for their main subsistence activities. And then as you move toward the market center, which is so these more remote towns are usually about 8 hours by bus and then 3 to 7 by canoe to get to. You can then go to the bigger town called Sakua, and there is when I first went in 2008, there wasn't even a stoplight. Last time I went, which was 2014, so I'm sure a lot has changed even since then. There was froyo places, coffee places, many stoplights. So market integration is happening really fast in this town. And so you have populations that live, our communities that are about an hour from there that we work with, and they can come into town fairly regularly, engage more in wage labor, buy foods at the market. And then you have communities that are, as I said, much farther away. So the lifestyles are a pretty big range of this kind of market integration, as we call it.
And what is it like for you? What was it like the first time that you went there? How did that feel? What was it like doing research there?
This is actually what got me really interested in parasites and in neglected tropical diseases as well, because I live right outside of Chicago. Everybody says that who's from Illinois that they live right outside of Chicago. I was about an hour from Chicago, but if you know the area, you know it's like town after town after town, and it never really becomes anything but town. So, so I wasn't really used to much rural environments at all to begin with. It's interesting because we in the United States aren't as aware of parasites. So when one of the first things I noticed going down, and this is a parasite that has largely been eradicated, a lot of the men, the older men, so 50, 40-year-old men, had cloudiness in their eyes. And
Mhm.
that's from a parasite called onchocerciasis, which is river blindness. And it's a worm that you can get through biting with a vector transmitted insect, and it will kind of go into the skin, cause like worm lumps in the skin, travel through the body, and eventually the larva will eat the eyes to some extent and cause blindness. So seeing that startled me a little bit, that this I didn't know that this existed. We had this book called Where There Is No Doctor that is also kind of terrifying and explained it to me. So that got me really interested in parasites. This is actually something that has largely been eradicated in the region. So you only see it in older men. They don't have the worms anymore, but they have the cataracts from it. And that terrified me, but to deal with that idea, I became very interested in the parasites themselves to the point that now I think parasites are just super cool. So but yeah, that was I think probably the thing that stood out to me the most was just this idea that these relatively large animals that if you look at in the skin of individuals who have onchocerciasis, or if you look at in our intestines, if you have Ascaris lumbricoides, the giant roundworm, that there are these large animals that can live inside of us just struck me and became really interesting to me.
Yeah, giant roundworms are no joke. If you are not squeamish, or even if you are, I suppose, so you can better understand what we're talking about, go ahead and Google image search that. They are not small animals.
Mhm.
That's why they're called giant.
Yeah, they can cause organ failure and intestinal obstruction in really high levels. So they are one of the more common parasites that we see in Ecuador, but they get pretty big. But we
Mhm.
don't see them specifically in the intestine. We see them as eggs in stool samples.
So I wanted to talk to you a little bit about a paper that deals with the shore that recently came out that you did, and it was looking at disgust, the emotion of disgust, what its evolutionary purpose might serve, and how having differing levels of disgust and market integration, what effects that has on parasite infection. There's a lot of different moving components here. So I want to first start with, what is disgust? What is it?
Yeah, disgust is a human emotion that is hypothesized to and fairly well supported now, thanks to us, but others as well.
Congratulations.
Yeah, disgust is a basic human emotion that's thought to have evolved to protect from pathogens or from kind of harmful individuals or fitness reducing activities, things that might harm us. Yeah, it's something that theoretically we take in information from the environment around us. We say, is this harmful? We don't obviously do this mentally, but our brain is doing this the whole time. We say, is that something that is harmful? Should I go near it? Should I stay away from it? And then tells us these cues are something we should avoid. And then we get those characteristic feelings of nausea or a little tiny bit of fight or flight, or like it makes you want to gag, or so it's that kind of situation where you see something, you're grossed out, and you want to get away from it. And then you don't eat it or you don't interact with it, and you don't suffer from whatever it might have caused you. Even if it was nothing, you come to associate it with being associated with something bad.
Yeah, yeah, it definitely has an evolutionary basis where people who, or organisms that had higher disgust levels were less likely to interact with things that could harm them, so they're more likely to reproduce or be have more fitness to reproduce. And you talked about an evolutionary arms race earlier, but like it's really just like who has the most kids. Like that's really what it is when it comes to evolution. One of the things that I thought was really interesting about your paper is that you found that the feeling of disgust was mediated by a few different things. There's individual variation in whether or not people feel disgust, but then it's also what is their household like? And then on a greater level, what is their community like?
Mhm.
Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah. So I want to quickly just say that our kind of initial findings were that disgust sensitivity, so how disgusted you are by things, whether you're more disgusted or less disgusted, that varies across humans. So, how disgusted you are by things did seem to protect from infection. In this case, not as much with parasites, but more with bacterial and viral infection, which we measured through inflammatory immune response to those things. So, we did find that disgust was effective at protecting us from infection. What is interesting about that is that it has to, you if you think about it, it has to be environmentally calibrated to be effective. So if you live in a situation where you can't avoid a pathogen, for instance, you work on a farm and you're constantly handling animal feces, or if you to get food, you have to go out and hunt animals or interact with the soil or, yeah, things that could put you into contact with human waste and animal waste and other human bodily fluids. Think of nurses, for instance. They can't be disgusted by blood or they're going to have a hard time working. So if you're exposed to something quite a bit, you can't really afford to be disgusted by it if being disgusted by it would stand in the way of your survival. So we looked at that based on market integration. So in remote communities, are they more or less disgusted than in communities who are more market integrated? I want to say in less market integrated communities, are they more disgusted by stuff than in more market integrated communities? And we found that there is a lot of variation based on that. So in the less market integrated communities where they live in tend to live more in houses that have dirt floors, where animals come in more often, where they're engaging with the soil more for horticulture or they're hunting and fishing more. They tend to have lower disgust sensitivity towards those kinds of stimuli. And when you look at communities who are living in more market integrated contexts where they're likely eating more processed foods, they have houses that are made of cement, the floors are more easily cleaned, their cooking areas are separate. They tend to have higher disgust sensitivity. So it's basically saying that your disgust sensitivity should be calibrated to the environment you're in and what you can or cannot avoid. It's almost like a way of motivating people in high disease environments who have the means to avoid infection to actually take those means and use them. So cleaning or washing our hands more. You can even think about when you go camping, if you want to contextualize it, when you go camping and you don't have a way of washing your hands after a day of hiking or fishing or whatever you've done with your camping experience. You can't wash your hands and you are really hungry. You're not going to not eat. You're going to maybe wipe your hands on your dirty pants and then eat your sandwich, which you would never do at home when you could just go wash your hands. You won't even really be that disgusted by that situation because you can't be, because you really want to eat your sandwich.
Yeah, no, totally. I 100% understand what you're talking about. I both camp and I also used to work on farms. And like in retrospect, I probably should have washed my hands more, but I was just on a farm all the time and it just like didn't even occur to me. I was like, this is clean dirt. Um, but no, disgust definitely can be a luxury, which I hadn't really thought about before reading your paper. I guess one of my questions is, how do you go about measuring disgust?
So for this study, we used a questionnaire. There are a few questionnaires that exist. The issue is that this idea of disgust has largely only been studied in kind of wealthy nations, usually among university students. So you don't really get at that variation very well. And the studies that are more cross cultural tend to reach out via internet. So you're getting a huge bias in who has internet because that's going to be a lot different from people who don't. And so the questionnaires that exist, we had to modify quite a bit to include things that are more relevant to the Schwar. One avenue that's really interesting is that we incorporated is the idea of chicha. So chicha itself to the Schwar is not disgusting.
What
It's
is,
a drink that
yes, thank you. What is chicha?
it's a drink that they make. The women are the ones who make it. And in the Schwar, it's made with yucca. So chewing this tuberous root plant, they chew it, they spit it in a container, and then they let it ferment. And then that's what everybody drinks. And so it's kind of, if you think about it, a way of naturally using the bacteria from spit to naturally ferment something, and which might seem like it would have more pathogens because it's coming from spit, but that fermentation process from the bacteria actually makes it safer probably than drinking, for instance, dirty water or something. And it is fermented, so it's interesting in that regard. This is kind of tangential, but we did a microbial analysis on it. Elise Kohlhauer was the lead author on this. she did a microbial analysis on it. That paper came out in like 2014, I think. And one of the main bacteria in it is lactobacillus, which is a really good bacteria to have in your intestines because it helps with a lot of digestion and that. But I think it is also one of the main bacteria that are found in sour beer, which I love sour beer. They use that bacteria to help ferment sour beers. So that changed my feelings on chicha because of my love for sour beer. but but we asked about not chicha itself, but we asked about drinking chicha made from somebody who is sick, for instance, and drinking chicha from somebody who has bad teeth or rotten teeth, because those would both be signs of infection in another person. And that was associated with disgust. A lot of the calibration that we did to figure out what was useful came from Dr. Larry Sugiyama, who is the founder of the Shore Health and Life History Project. And he has spent, I know he spent a couple decades down there. I feel like I don't want to exactly age him because I don't want to make him sound older than he is. Sorry, Larry. But he's spent a lot of time working among the Shuar and the Achuar, and I think that's it. But he spent a lot of time working with the Shuar and other South American populations in the Amazon, and so he had a lot of ideas of what, and through conversations, what would be found disgusting. So touching dead animals that were hunted with your hands was something that would change with market integration, and stepping in feces with bare feet. Finding worms or other animals in your food. These are all things that we ended up including in this questionnaire. And so that gets at a number of factors of how disgusting things are for things like vector-borne diseases, animal-borne diseases, contagion-related diseases with other people, and then like food-borne illnesses as well.
Yes. Yes. This all makes a lot of sense to me. I guess, I don't know, listeners definitely don't know this. You don't know this either because it's the first time we've ever talked to each other. But my parents are actually Venezuelan. And my grandfather was a plastic surgeon in Caracas. And he used to tell this story about a flight that went down in the Amazon. And the Venezuelan government at the time was well, it still was not very responsible. And instead of going out and looking for survivors, they're just like, everyone died, sorry. And they like returned random ashes to the families. Turns out one person survived, and she was found wandering around the Amazon by an indigenous group, and they took her in. But by the time they found her, she'd been like wandering around for a while. And so she had like a really heavy parasitic load, and like was not doing well. They managed to kind of nurse her back to health. And an anthropologist actually found her with the group. And then my grandfather treated her for all of the infections later. And that story really always stuck with me because he was explaining to me like just how many different, like the girl had like bot flies, like the girl had all kinds of worms, and then she also had some disfigurement, which is why my grandfather was treating her from the plane crash. And just I think it just like really drove home to me how different life can be in these tropical areas. But then at the same time, I grew up in Virginia, and I grew up working on farms. And like I said earlier, like, oh, that's clean dirt. People don't really think about it, but like animals in the United States, like we are constantly deworming them, right? Like if you have a dog, you definitely give them heartworm medication. If you have horses or cows, like we deworm them twice a year, and like we look at their poop constantly and kick it over to see if there's any flies in it. I know people who've had roundworm, which is a type of, or ringworm rather, which is a type of fungus. It's not even a type of worm. I don't know why it's called ringworm. You know, like I know people who've had scabies, and it's like we still have these things in the United States, and that's something that you actually study as well.
Mm-hmm.
Do you want to talk a little bit about reach?
Yeah. So one of the areas that I'm also interested in is understanding these parasite loads in the United States. So this is something that's been very understudied, where up until the 1950s, 1970s, there were reports of parasites in the United States. And in some areas in Appalachia, in like the Mississippi River Delta, people had, like, there were towns and counties that had 50% infection rates with soil transmitted helminths. And then for some reason, after that time, I think the very last really good study that came out, we just sort of stopped talking about it. We just started implying that it couldn't happen here and that people don't have parasites here. And so there's been very little follow up. There's a team currently working in Alabama led by Rogelio Meja and others, and they have found fairly high hookworm rate in a town in Alabama. So we know that there are parasites still in the US. We just don't know how many. We don't exactly know where. If you talk to people in places that we've been working, the grandparents remember being told avoid going outside with your shoes off because you'll get hookworm. Hookworm is a type of soil transmitted helminth that rather than getting through eating eggs, not eating eggs, eating consuming fecally contaminated soil that has helminth eggs in it. You get them because the larva hatches in the soil and then burrows through your feet, through your skin that comes into contact with it. And then they go through this whole process in your body where they end up in your intestines. But the older members of communities in the South remember being told, don't go out without shoes on because you will get hookworm. But that's not something that the kids are familiar with anymore. And nothing happened to really stop the worms from being transmitted. So we recently started this project, myself and my colleague Teresa Gildner, with funding from the Betcher Foundation. We started this project called Rural Embodiment and Child Health Project, where we're checking out different communities in Appalachia. Our first field season, we went in 2019 to Mississippi, and we're measuring whether we can see evidence of soil transmitted helminths there through stool samples. And then we're looking at immune system factors, so intestinal inflammation, immunoglobulin E, which is associated with macroparasite infection as well as allergies, and then some inflammatory markers as well. So we're looking at all of that in children throughout the US. We were wishing by now to have more data, but then COVID happened. So hopefully soon we'll go more than just one place. But one of the interesting things that we found, at least in the small preliminary sampling we got in Mississippi, was that we're still waiting on DNA analysis, 18S sequencing for getting more information on macroparasite infection. We did do microscopic analysis and we didn't see anything that was obvious infection, but we're expecting infections here to be a lot lighter. So we wanted to do genetic analysis on that. So we didn't see anything parasitic in direct looking at the slides. We did find that they had really high rates of intestinal inflammation compared to other children in the United States. And this is, the nurse was telling us that this is likely associated with Helicobacter pylori infection. So H. pylori is a fairly common bacteria that people had throughout history. If you look at rates since the 1950s, it's actually declined. And it was never really associated as a pathogenic infection at the time. But now when we talk about it, that's all we talk about is how pathogenic it is. So this is suggesting to us that there's some intestinal or microbial dysbiosis going on where the intestinal microbiome isn't as balanced. So the more pathogenic species may be taking over. This is something we want to look at a lot more as soon as this pandemic goes away and actually test H. pylori infection.
And I think if listeners have heard of H. pylori, it's probably in connection with peptic ulcers.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's how people are going to be most familiar with this particular bacteria. It's a little spiral-shaped bacteria, and when it burrows into your intestines, it can give you ulcers.
Yes, but what's really cool about it,
yes, hit me.
I follow up on your ulcers, but it's associated. So having it when people have these pathogenic infections with it does cause ulcers and certain gastric cancers. But in people who have never had it, there's higher rates of, other kinds of cancers. I can't remember what. So it's like one of those damned if you do, damned if you don't. Sorry if you can't swear on here.
Yeah, you're totally fine. I think that's okay.
Yeah. It's one of those things where if you had it, you're going to get something, and if you haven't had it, you're also kind of screwed. So it's a interesting one.
One of the things that caught my attention in your paper is that you said that the Shuar, they they tend not to be they tend not to have chronic inflammation in the same way that Americans do. So inflammation amongst the Shuar is really indicative of some kind of pathogenic infection, something like that, as opposed to just like generalized inflammation that you see in Americans. What's going on? Why are we so inflamed?
Yeah. Yeah. So in a 2011, I think it was study, 2010, 2011, McDade led that study, and we collected that data in 2010. We actually found that there was no evidence of chronic low grade inflammation among the Shuar. And so high inflammation, acute inflammation is usually associated with infection, and you do see that. So bacterial and viral infections, your we measured it using CRP, and this is an immune marker, a cytokine that gets activated in an inflammatory response. So you say you get cut, and then after you get a cut, your body responds to that cut by sending inflammation there to fight off anything that might enter the cut, to heal the cut, and then that inflammation will go away. So that's an example of an acute infection. If you get infected with other infectious diseases, you'll have an inflammatory response as well to help fight those. So the Schwar do have elevated CRP, C-reactive protein, in that sense. They do have elevated inflammation there. But they don't have what we have in the US, which is this chronic, low grade, just kind of constant state of your immune system being activated for some reason. And this elevated inflammation is associated with things like heart disease, other metabolic syndromes. It's associated with allergy and autoimmunity and so on. So, for some reason in the US, our immune systems are just constantly amped up to at least a little bit to cause this low grade chronic inflammation. And obviously, not everybody has that, but it's more common here than there. And so that's one of the things that I'm interested in is whether or not exposure to important immune priming pathogens like soil transmitted helminths, but also other old friends that we would have had, like bacteria and viruses that may have been common, we don't get exposed to them.
Just so you know, old friends is in air quotes every time she says it.
Sorry, yeah, quote unquote old friends that we don't get exposed to anymore, that this might be causing our immune systems to overreact and leading to this low grade inflammation. Other things like high cholesterol and obesity, those also contribute to that inflammatory response as well.
For sure. I think the equivalent, the way that I think about it is kind of like when a little kid is crying for whatever reason, like they've fallen over and they're just like, they're crying. They're not actually hurt, and then an adult comes along and goes, I'll give you something real to cry about. And they hit them. This is a horrible, horrible example.
Oh.
But the thing is, like, the kid doesn't really understand what pain is. And so they're crying. And when they actually get hit, then they're like, oh, this is what actual pain is like. I'm going to cut all of this out. You look so sad.
Oh, no, you're making sense.
Here, how about another metaphor? The way that I think about this sometimes is that the role that parasites have played in history is that they help our immune system understand what is actually a threat and what isn't a threat. And so if you've never experienced a real threat before, then you have no way of knowing what you should actually react to. I think it's kind of the same thing for our immune systems with parasites.
Yes,
potentially.
Like allergies and autoimmune diseases are caused because your body starts to view harmless threats in the case of allergies, and self like cells in the case of autoimmunity. Your body views these as a threat even though they aren't, and so then it responds, and inflammation is indicated in that because it kind of might start the whole process. And that was actually something when COVID first started spreading, and they were realizing that children weren't very well affected with that. or weren't as affected by the worst effects of it, at least, they were hypothesizing that it's because children, especially kids in daycare, are so inundated with viruses that they are just ready. They've probably seen something similar at some point. That was at least one of the ideas with it. And that is so true if anybody has ever had children. Like the first when my daughter started daycare when she was 1 year old, we spent the first year of her life being sick with everything. In 2019, she came home with the simplest cold, and it caused my husband that one cold caused my husband to go to urgent care with pneumonia and for me to get like double viral pink eye and have to go to the doctor for that. So they're like kids are exposed to these things and they're ready to fight them. And as adults, we've sort of maybe not as primed, or I hope I am after a year of daycare exposures.
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely interesting. I think the thing that I hear a lot from my colleagues right now is they're like, I haven't been sick in a year because we haven't been anywhere in a year. And I'm like, are we all just going to get super sick when we all go back to work?
I'm so nervous about that. And that's one of the interesting things with the hygiene hypothesis is what we're doing right now. And I'm not saying don't do it, because washing your hands a lot and sanitizing and wearing masks is so important. But we're not getting exposed to everything else now. So I know we're going to have a rough year after all this is over, but it's okay. We'll get by.
I do have another question about COVID too, which is, do you think this is like completely hypothetical? And I know sometimes scientists really enjoy this and sometimes they're like, I cannot answer this without research. But do you think that our American feelings of disgust are going to change post COVID, or have they changed already because of COVID, do you think?
That is a really interesting question. One of the things that we kind of did talk about, we didn't write about this in the paper, but we've since talked about it a little bit, is that disgust doesn't seem to be very useful, at least the immediate disgust response when it comes to preventing COVID infection, because a lot of people who have are infected with the virus are asymptomatic and they're still spreading it. So there's nothing to be disgusted by in that sense. However, I've found myself being more and more disgusted by simple coughs. Just like hearing somebody cough, even on TV, I'm like, oh God, it's happening. But or if you were to cough
Yeah,
right now, my heart would be like, oh my God, stay away. But you're like in an entirely different state. So I think we are going to probably respond differently to those things. And there's speculation I've seen that people will continue wearing masks more. This idea of going to work when you're not feeling well will probably, hopefully, go away.
I hope so.
But obviously our system doesn't really allow that kind of thinking. But
I know. I'm totally guilty of this in that I've worked at places where they just like didn't believe that people ever actually got sick. They always thought that people were slacking off. And so what I would do is I would wait until I got super sick and then go to work and be super miserable just so I could be like, see, look how sick I am. Please let me go home. Which is like not that's not great. I'm infecting all those people all around me. This is obviously pre-COVID,
Yeah, we
folks. Like this
didn't
is
used
not
to care. We didn't used to care about that. So that's something that, because we're going to all be hypersensitive, will likely go away. Aaron Blackwell and Joshua Tiber just had a paper come out about disgust in response to COVID. That's pretty cool.
That's actually a really good transition into the final part of the interview, which is where I ask you about reading.
Oh,
Are you
good.
ready?
Yeah.
Okay, first question. If someone wanted to learn more about your area of work generally, what would be a good thing for them to read?
Well, if it's specifically about my area of work, I have a list of all of my publications on my website. So that's a good place to go. But the thing, I'll tell you the things that inspired this research and my interest in this were kind of three main books that when I was early on in my graduate career trying to figure out what I wanted to study and had come back from Ecuador and knew that I was somewhat interested in parasites, but didn't fully know what exactly I wanted to do. I read Marlene Zook's Riddled with Life. So all three of these are popular books. They're easy reads. They're really fun. Marlene Zooks Riddled with Life. And that's kind of what introduced me to the hygiene hypothesis, as well as this idea that we are just teeming with parasites and that, or other microbes, that we're just teeming with life. And that I think the most striking point that she makes in that book is that being uninfected is abnormal. So the norm in nature is to be infected with lots of things. If you go catch fish, for instance, in the wild, you go fishing, you reel them in, they're probably going to have a ton of worms. If you really stop any animal in the wild, they're full of worms. And then if you stop us just walking down the street in our hyper clean environments, we aren't. And that's abnormal. And so that was a point that really struck me and I think inspired a lot of my interest. Parasites, Tales of Humanity's Most Unwelcome Guests also gets at a lot of, that's by Rosemary Drisdell. And that gets at a lot of interesting stuff as well, both the good and the bad of parasites. She's a little more focused on the bad. I use both of these in my Parasites in Human Evolution class because one of them is a little more fluffy and about the good of parasites, and then the other is a little bit more like, oh my god, these things are everywhere, and and I like them both. And then the third is Parasite Rex by Carl Zimmer. I think all three of those are really good books to familiarize yourself, and they're fun and they're interesting.
Yes, I will also put forth Ed Yong's I Contain Multitudes. I really like that.
Yes, that's a good one too.
Yeah, and then there was another one that I read a while ago when it first came out in 2016. I can't remember what it was called, but I do remember it had a really excellent chapter on Toxoplasmosis gondii, which is the bacteria that you can find in cat feces.
Mm-hmm. That's actually a not a it's a parasite.
Oh, it's a parasite?
Yeah.
My bad. It's a parasite that you can find in cat feces. It's why they tell pregnant women not to scoop litter. And that really changed my perception of cats.
Yeah. People it insists in your brain. You like get it through cat urine. It goes up into your brain and it doesn't cause symptoms per se, but they say that it might cause more risk-taking behavior in humans and a bunch of stuff. And it's very common, especially in people who have outdoor cats. The reason that so I talk about this one in my section on mind control parasites in my human parasites and human evolution class. But the reason that it might affect us in humans is that it's associated with dopamine response in rats. And it makes rats who are infected with it unafraid of cat urine. They actually go seek out cat urine, and then the cat attack the rat, and then the cats get the parasite from the rats, and then the cat have the parasite. And so it's like the main hosts are the cats and the rats, and then we just end up with it because we happen to take care of cats.
Yeah. Like we're not the natural host. Like they don't really want to be in us per se. And I remember the name of the book. It's Kathleen McAuliffe's This Is Your Brain on Parasite.
Oh, cool.
This Is Your Brain on Parasites. Yes. There are some things that I liked and some things that I didn't like. I think that's true of any popular science book.
Yes, I'm not vouching for every single thing every one of these books say, but they are great.
Yeah. There's it's such an interesting field of study. My second question for you is, what are you reading for work right now?
So I've been, and this is another one that goes both ways. This will help familiarize people with the REACH study that we're doing, with our logic behind that. But it also is something that I'm reading as I write up some grants and papers, is Blue Marble Health by Peter Hotez. And that looks at how these areas where we have parasites and what are called neglected tropical diseases or diseases of poverty, that we have pockets of these diseases in these so-called quote unquote wealthy nations like the US. So we tend not to think of the US as a place where people have these tropical diseases, these parasites, but we do. And these are in these underserved, marginalized communities. And then right next to them, sometimes even right across like a city line, you'll have these affluent communities that are not affected or are being affected but aren't really acknowledging it. And so it's this idea that we call ourselves these wealthy nations, quote unquote wealthy nations, but we are not taking care of huge swaths of the population, and that's affecting overall health in all these places. So that's a really good book for understanding that relationship between kind of socioeconomic status and health.
Yeah. There's also been some really interesting reporting on health in Appalachia, especially from the Washington Post, and especially around dental access. It's honestly, it's heartbreaking. And I grew up, like I said, I feel like I've said it more on this show than ever before, but I grew up in Virginia, and I grew up like seeing some of the effects, and it's wild. Like, you don't even really think about it. I actually even dated a guy who he was my age, so like he was in his 30s, and he had crazy like amalgam fillings in his teeth from a dentist who probably should have retired like back in the 70s, and he was like 31 years old. He had like a whole dental crisis at 30 because he just didn't have that standard of care. I feel like I've also revealed a lot about my personal life on this episode. Talked a lot about guys I've dated. Listen, I'm single, so if you know any nice single men, go ahead and send me their names. I'm single
Nice.
and straight.
Nice.
Anyway,
Yeah.
go ahead.
So yeah, I think that is definitely that there are these regional pockets, and also even within regions there are these racial pockets, and that's a lot of what our
Yes.
reach study is looking at, is both how rural living and low socioeconomic status living, as well as sort of racial disparities, how all of that is coming together. And in our case, we're looking specifically at parasitic and microbial exposures, how that is kind of taken in by the environment and how that affects health and well-being. And that's what the embodiment idea comes from, is that these disparities that exist in people aren't these innate biological differences, that they are actually because of how our environment is interacting with us and how that's affecting our health. So that's something that I think is definitely important to consider, is that there are these pockets in our own country for a number of reasons that cause health problems and health disparities. I think I said disparities twice in that sentence, but you got me.
I got you. No, that's really interesting, and I think it's really valuable and important work. Third question. What are you consuming for fun right now? It can be anything. Doesn't have to be a book, because I had someone tell me I don't read for fun anymore because I can't.
No. I do read for fun, but I never know what I'm reading. So I have this guilty pleasure of going on the Kindle Prime store and downloading any free mystery thriller that has decent reviews. I don't even really look at the name of it. And then I prop it up on my pillow and I fall asleep reading it every night in the dark. So I read it for about 5 minutes and then I'm out. And then the next morning I wake up and my husband has moved my book and it's gone. So it takes me like 2 months to read a book and I never know what it is, but that's kind of how I fall asleep. But so I can't really endorse any reading right now, but I am obsessed with the show Dark on Netflix. I don't know if you've seen that, but it is amazing. I've watched it probably 3 times now. There are 3 seasons of it, and I have watched it 3 times, and you have to watch it 3 times to fully understand what is going on. It's a German show, so I use both subtitles and the dubbing, but it is the best show I've ever seen. So check that out. I can't even tell you what it's about because it will just spoil everything and at the same time make zero sense because it takes like 3 viewings to fully appreciate.
It's really funny because I did have another anthropologist recommend Dark to me on the show. I think it was Dr. Bartlink, I want to say. And he was like, I don't know how to tell you what it's about. He said the exact same thing as you did. And he's like, I'm rewatching it right now and I'm understanding it more, I think. And I'm like, this sounds wild.
If you go on the subreddit, there's like you don't want to spoil it for yourself, but you almost can't because it's so like there's so much going on. But there you'll find these people with these really intense family trees that they've drawn up to try and make sense of everything, and you almost need to do that. But it's an amazing show. I don't think I don't ever want to watch any other show after that. That's not true. I have watched other shows besides it, but I just watched Raised by Wolves on HBO, and that was fine until they completely botched evolution at the end and like said something about de-evolving, and I was like, I don't think that's a thing. And then I had a sour taste in my mouth.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
so it was a fun romp for most of the show, and then it wasn't. But dark is always good.
Okay, noted. Well, thank you very much for your recommendations, and thank you for spending time with me today. I really, really appreciate it. If you ever want to come back on the show, you're welcome.
Well, thank you so much. I really enjoyed talking with you.
Thanks for joining me for this episode of the Anthrobiology Podcast. If you have questions or comments, you can reach me at gabby.lapera@anthrobiology.com. That's spelled GABY.LAPERA@anthrobiology.com. This show was produced and edited by me. Music courtesy of Chad Crouch, aka Poddington Bear at Sound of Picture.